I've been loving using the Lumix S5 2X. I'm actually shooting on one right now, and this camera is such a beast with the open gate 6K, great autofocus, and a ton of other great Panasonic features. But after getting this camera and messing around with the kit lens, the 20-60 for a while, I decided I wanted to try the 24-105 f4 lens. And in this video, we're going to talk about why I think this is the one lens to rule them all and how great this lens is for both photos and videos as a content creator. It seems like everyone wants that buttery smooth, blurry background for their videos. It's only possible with a good prime, but I consider the Panasonic 24-105 f4 kind of the anti-prime lens because this lens is way more useful than any prime lens I have, and I use it almost as much as my standard S prime lenses that I use to shoot talking head videos like this. I also have the 20-60 f3.5 to f5.6 lens. I do really like this lens as well. The autofocus is great on it, but the big issue I had with this lens is the aperture changes from 3.5 all the way to 5.6 when you zoom in. So if you don't want your exposure to change, then you're going to have to jack your aperture up really high at the 5.6 so it doesn't change as you zoom in and out. So this lens is great and has its purpose, but I wanted that constant f4 aperture so you could zoom in and out and your exposure doesn't change. You don't have to worry about your settings changing. Also, when a lot of people think of f4, they think that's a really high aperture. They think you can't get a blurry background. But what I found with the 24-105 is you can get a blurry background if you're able to back up further away. And if you zoom into that 80, 70, 105 range, then you're going to get a lot of great compression and the background is going to start to blur away. I found this to be really useful on my slider to get a lot of really cool cinematic shots. And I also really like this lens with the S5 2X using the 4K 60 frames a second to get close-ups that are nice and slow-mo. And another really great feature about this lens is it has the optical image stabilization built in. So you get lens stabilization and you get the incredible stabilization that Panasonic's bodies have, which is one of the reasons why I think this lens is such a B-roll beast that people are sleeping on, because having that dual image stabilization both in the lens and in the camera works really well at getting rid of micro jitters. And you can rock this at 24 or 35 millimeters, and then you're going to be able to get really stable footage. And if you zoom it all the way into 105, you will notice a little bit more shake, but it still works really well to get those handheld shots. Let's quickly go over some of the features of the lens. You do get the hood in the box. You can take the hood off, and you also get a lens cap. It's a 77 millimeter lens thread, and this is an L mount lens, so this will work on any of the new full frame Panasonic cameras, and it also works on any of the other Leica L mount cameras as well. So you get a lot of versatility with this lens. Whenever you zoom the lens in and out, you will notice the barrel does extend on it, so that's going to affect the balance if you use this on a gimbal. If you're using it on a gimbal, I recommend balancing it with the lens about halfway before you finish balancing it, and then zoom a little bit and see if it messes up your balance. On the side of the lens, we do get a couple different switches. We have one that locks the zoom, so if you want to have it locked in at 24 millimeters in a bag, you can lock it. Although I didn't notice it creeping very much if you don't have it locked, but you can't lock it at any other position other than 24. You can't lock it in at 105, so the lock switch only locks it at 24 millimeters. Below it, you do get an autofocus manual focus switch, which is always a nice feature to have. And then there's also the optical image stabilization off-on switch on it as well. This can come in handy as well. I usually just leave it on. And then on the actual lens itself, you do get the focus ring, which feels pretty good, but it is still a fly-by-wire focus ring. This lens is pretty big. It comes in at 680 grams or about 1.5 pounds, which is almost the exact same weight as the S5 2X. So you're basically doubling the weight of the camera with this lens, where if you use a prime, it's going to weigh considerably less. So whenever you attach the lens to the camera, you will notice it does become a pretty sizable setup. But I find that the size of the lens makes it really great for handheld use because you can get a really good grip on it. The focus ring is very easy to grab, and the zoom ring works great as well. In terms of build quality, it does have a substantial feel to it, both in the weight and just in the quality of it. Panasonic's lenses have this really nice, just low profile look to them. Let's talk about autofocus for a little bit. When I was checking out some reviews before buying this, I did notice there were some people who were complaining a little bit about the autofocus on it, but I think that was due to using it with the older cameras that had the older autofocus systems. But with the S5 2X, I'm having pretty good results with the autofocus. And you also want to take note that this is considered a macro lens by Panasonic. Technically, it's only 0.5x, so it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, and you're able to focus up to 11.81 inches whenever you're at 105 millimeters. So I found this works really well for getting close-up shots, but it's not quite as good as a macro lens, but the autofocus more than makes up for it. Now just note that the autofocus of this lens is going to be hampered by whatever body you have it on. So if you have one of the older Panasonic bodies, you're not going to have quite as good of autofocus performance on it. I really like using this with the 6K open gate, or I also use crop mode and shoot 4K 60. I get some really good close-up shots, a lot of great B-roll for my other videos. This is essentially my B-roll lens. I shoot my talking head with the prime usually, and then I shoot all my B-roll content with the 24-105. I also really like using this lens for photography. I found the autofocus performs maybe even better in photo mode than video mode with this lens. And I just love that you can quickly go from getting a wide angle shot to getting a nice close-up shot, going from 24-105. So this is just a really useful focal length for me. Let's talk about the aperture for a second. This is an f4 lens, which a lot of people are gonna dog on because f4 is not as low as f2.8. It's a couple stops higher, but I haven't had any issues with being able to get enough light in my studio environment right here, which means I have a couple different lights, so I'm always able to crank the brightness up on my lights. I also shoot a lot outdoors with this lens and have great results. I have noticed in the past when I use f4 lenses and I'm shooting a stage, I do have to jack the ISO up higher, but with these newer cameras, then one of the base ISOs on it is 4,000, so you can go comfortably past 4,000 and still get really good usable shots. So the f4 is going to be more than good enough for most situations. But of course, if you are shooting in really dark situations and you need crisper images, you probably are going to want to go for one of the f1.8 or f1.4 prime lenses, or even f2.8, just to save a little bit more light on it. I also do appreciate really crisp close-up shots, so that's one of the reasons I don't really mind the f4, because a lot of times with this lens I'm shooting close-up and I don't want the depth of field to be super shallow, and then if I'm shooting with my background far enough away and I'm shooting all the way in at something small, then I find that this still does give me that really blurry background. So for me, I haven't had any issues with f4 being blurry enough in the background, and in fact I do think the f4 is better because it helps me to get more crispy shots. So we've had a lot of great things to say about this lens, but there are definitely a few drawbacks, namely the weight. We talked earlier about how this lens weighs about 680 grams or 1.5 pounds, so it essentially doubles the weight of the S5 IIX, which I do find it to be kind of big, kind of cumbersome, but it's still smaller than any other DSLR setup of the past, and you're able to get such a wide focal range. I think it's worth the trade-off of the weight. The other big con of this lens is the price. It typically comes in at $1,300, but Panasonic is almost always running some sort of sale. I've seen this retail for $1,000 as well. I bought mine used for about $650 or $700, I think. And to me, it's worth it because this lens is an absolute B-roll machine. I don't have to worry about changing my focal length up. I don't have to worry about how close up I'm getting to my shots, or if I'm going to be outside of my magnification range when I'm getting close-up shots. This lens just does it all, and it does it so well. And I think that's why it's worth the price. You could essentially pair this with your favorite S prime lens, so you have a good low light lens, and then you have this as a good all-purpose lens, and you're just able to get such a wide focal range. And I think that's part of why this lens is such an attractive option. It also does come in at a little bit lighter than the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, and if you're willing to trade off that little bit of light loss for it and for the better macro capabilities, I definitely recommend the Panasonic 24-105. So overall, I do really like the Panasonic 24-105 f4 L mount lens. It's such a versatile lens with the wide focal range, the image stabilization that's built in, and the macro capabilities. If you have any other questions about this lens, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them. If you want to buy one for yourself, I do have links in the description below. Like this video, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming content. Be sure to check out this recommended video that will be of interest to you.